Years ago, my oldest brother was about to graduate from seminary in Grand Rapids, Michigan. My dad took all of the family, the rest of us, on the road and said, let's get there to see the graduation. So we went. We showed up a few days ahead of time, and my brother told us about this island out in the middle of Lake Huron called Mackinac Island. I called it Mackinac. Mackinac, I guess, is the right way to say it. But it sounded like this really cool place because they had no motor vehicles on the island, only wild horses. And I thought, this is a cool place to see. Until they told me you had to take this ferry boat all the way out there to get to it. I'm not a fan of big bodies of water because of something happened when I was a kid. And I thought, oh man, so we got to do this. Okay, I can make it on a boat ride. As long as we're inside that boat, I'm good to go. But my dad didn't do that. He said, everybody in the family, we're going to go in the very front of the boat. And there was one bench seat up there. And they didn't have guardrails, they had chains up. And I'm like, oh, we're going to fall out in the ocean, or in the water, in the lake. And instead of enjoying the ride out there, seeing the beauty all around me, I started thinking about Gilligan's Island. And you know what happened with Gilligan, right? They shipwrecked. And I'm thinking, oh man, there's no island in sight. How are we going to get shipwrecked? But it's going to happen. And I already knew ahead of time that if we did, my younger brother was going to be Gilligan. But it was an awesome place to visit, but I sure would not like to live there because I don't think I could handle being surrounded by water on all sides. That's not for me. Now, I don't know about you, but I love watching movies on TV and maybe shows about ships out in the water. I love that. That's kind of cool to watch. In fact, my favorite show is Deadliest Catch. Anybody like that? Where they're out on the Bering Sea and they catch the crab. It's so cool to see all the things that they go through. I mean, there's storms that show up out of nowhere. Their boats break down and all kinds of things happen. But it's just cool to see they always make it back to shore somehow. Well, we're talking about boats today because we're talking about Paul. We're in the last 2 chapters of Acts. And Paul is about to get on this boat. He's about to head to Rome. And if you remember, he was told, you're going to go there and speak about Jesus. We're going to see all the things that he went through on this trip. But before we go there, I'm going to give you a little background about what happened before this. If you remember, Paul was in Jerusalem facing the Sanhedrin, which was made up of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he said these words to them. I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial. And he said that for a reason, because he wanted to cause a problem. He knew that the Pharisees and the Sadducees believed different things. The Sadducees denied the resurrection of the dead. They didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in the afterlife. But the Pharisees did. They believed in all those things. So Paul's remark was intentional. He believed in the afterlife. He believed in because we as believers know that there's a home waiting. There's something more for us after this life, right? If we have Jesus, we have heaven waiting for us. Praise God for that. Well, the council, as you know, started this big riot, and the Roman guards had to pull Paul back into the prison to protect him from being killed. And while Paul was in prison, he had this vision from the Lord. Acts 23:11 says these words. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. Now get that. He was making that promise. I said this 2 weeks ago. I'm going to reiterate that again today. You are not going to die in Jerusalem. If you remember correctly, all of these people said, don't go to Jerusalem because you will be killed for your faith there. They do not take it lightly when you say the name of Jesus. But here is God in a vision saying, take courage. You're going to make it to Rome because I'm going to make sure you get to Rome. So along the way, as they're getting on this boat, as Paul's getting on this ship to head to Rome, they face a lot of different things, a lot of storms. And I'm talking the literal, physical storms. But there's lessons that we're going to learn today as we hop on this boat with Paul. You ready to get on this boat? Yeah. Okay, here we go. The first lesson we learn is this. God's plan may lead through storms. That happens. Acts 27, verses 1 through 12. And I'm gonna show you this like I did the first service. Some of these you're going to see in my print here. I've got red. It's because these are some difficult names and I had to write down how to say them correctly. Because if you can go on Google and it'll tell you exactly how to say them. But if you would like to read them names, more than happy. Okay. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so that they might provide for his needs. From there we put out to sea again and passed the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea of the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving at Cydnus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite Salmone. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens, near the town of Lasea. Much time had been lost and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement, so Paul warned them. Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also. But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest. Let me ask you this question. Do we face storms in our lives? We're talking some real serious things come up in our lives, right? And we can get afraid at times. Anybody want to admit that they get afraid? Yeah, I'm telling you right now, I get afraid of some of the things that happen. But, just like Paul, I have God to lean on, to rely on. The important thing for us to remember is that the storm may be just part of the journey that God has intended to put another purpose in our lives. He's using the storm to take us somewhere else, to do something else in our lives. May include difficult times or challenging seasons, and may come in different things like health concerns or financial struggles, or even relationship problems. These things are not random. They are part of God's plan to shape us and draw us closer to Him, to learn how to trust Him in a deeper way. And some things we need to remember in the midst of a storm, that God is in control of all the circumstances, including the storms, right? His presence is in the midst of troubles, showing His authority and promise to never leave us nor forsake us. That's one of my favorite verses, to never leave us nor forsake us. To hear those words, doesn't that just bring a calmness to your soul? Knowing no matter what you face today, or what you're going to face tomorrow, or next week, or next year, God walks with you, and He'll never leave your side through it. Deuteronomy 31:6 says these words, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." See, storms can expose problems in our lives. They can confront fears and push us to rely on God's strength even more. They can mold our character, deepen our trust in God. And I'll tell you what, it's okay. I'm okay with dealing with storms, aren't you? As long as I know that God is with me and is walking every step with me, that I'm not going through it alone, because realistically, we can't do anything on our own, can we? We need God's strength and God's power to get through everything in life. Even during times of chaos in our lives, God can direct events toward a good outcome. Romans 8:28 says these words, "And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." So think back to that shipwreck. Oh, we haven't gotten there yet. Acts 27 is a perfect example, right? As we're starting today in this boat ride. There's going to be a shipwreck. Are you excited about that? Not many people would be excited about a shipwreck. But you know what? There's amazing things that we're going to see in this. If you hear that God's plans lead through storms, remember that the path to God's purpose may not be smooth, may face obstacles on the way. And we all face obstacles in our lives, don't we? And if you could not say yes to that, trust me, something's coming, right? God's plans are long-term and may unfold in many ways that we just can't see because God's ways are perfect, and there's so much more than ours. Storms can be opportunities to grow closer to God. And I'll tell you what, every time something comes up in my life, I cry out to God. Help me through this. And he's never failed me one single time. Staying in God's will is the safest place to be in any storm. The second lesson we can learn is this: God's presence brings peace in the midst of fear. Now, nobody's afraid of anything, right? Hey, boys, are you guys afraid of anything? I'm going to ask my grandsons. Ben, are you afraid of anything? Some things. How about you, Miles? Are you afraid of losing at miniature golf? Never mind. Okay. I had to put that in there. So we go to Acts 27, verses 13 through 26. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity. So they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster. We know about nor'easters, right here? Swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. So the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes around the ship itself to hold it together. Just stop for a second and picture that. They put ropes all the way underneath the boat and everything and tied it tight to try to hold it together. That's how strong this storm was. Because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Sardis. So they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the wind that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Can you get the dire straits they were facing? When neither sun nor stars appeared, can you imagine that? No sun or stars for many days. And the storm continued raging. We finally gave up all hope of being saved. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to listen." Can you see that parent in that? You should have listened to what I said, right? Parents, how many of you have done that? To the kids, right? You should have listened to what I said. Everything would be fine. Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you." I want to be on that boat, don't you? So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on a small island. So to say that God's presence brings peace in the midst of fear means that we are in a close relationship with him. And how do we get in that close relationship? Does anybody know? Have a clue? Reading his word, right? Spending time in worship together, like we're all here today. And those at home are from all over the place are here with us today, gathered. We are called to be together, right? That's how God created us, to be together and to worship together. But we experience a deep calm as we trust God, right? I don't know how many of you have gone through things and gone, "Oh man, I'm not going to make it through this." And you cry out to God, and all of a sudden this peace comes over you, and your soul quiets. You been there before? Yeah, that's what our God does. Scripture talks about how when we trust in God, we will be kept in perfect peace. Isaiah 26:3 says these words, "You will be kept in perfect peace, those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you." And then I'm throwing a lot of scripture at you for a reason today, because these are things that we know, right? But we need a reassurance sometimes, because we face fearful times, don't we? And like I said, the days that we are living in are getting worse and worse. And we don't need to be afraid, right? Because we have God. But in John 14:27, Jesus himself says these words, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives you. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." I love that verse. How many have heard that verse, that part of that verse? Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. Now the other question. How many of us know that verse? You don't have to raise your hands for this. Know that verse and know that we shouldn't be afraid, and yet we are afraid sometimes, right? Don't raise your hands, because we're human. We need to trust God. Take him at his word, because I tell you what, he's never failed me, and he won't fail you. It can be hard not to be afraid when some serious storm hits us, but as believers, we have to remember that Jesus is our lifeboat. Paul describes what that peace that comes over us when we cry out to God is like. Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7, it says these words, "Do not be anxious about anything." Now let's slow down a little bit. We've got 2 hours to sit here together, right? Okay. Do not be anxious about anything. Don't raise your hands. Are you anxious about anything right now? Is there anything that's been mulling in your mind? Something that's been hanging over you maybe for a while? Something that you have not given to the Lord yet. But in every situation, in other words, whatever you're dealing with right now, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to the Lord. So he's saying, bring it to the Lord. Lay it at his feet and trust him to help you through it. We're going to have an opportunity later in the service to do just that. So I prepare you ahead of time for a reason, because I want you to know that we can bring anything to him, can't we? And we can trust him in all things at all times, because our God is a good God. But fear arises when we feel life is out of control and we doubt God's sovereignty. But God's presence shifts our focus from that fear to the one who is in control. Isaiah 41:10 says these words, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Get the picture of that. You are held in God's hand. You are in God's hand. What better place can we be than in God's hand? There's no better place. Every single day, as we trust him, we're in his hand. I don't know about you, but when I face fear in my life, I just give that fear to God. And he calms that storm. And then it can be like, I just watch and see what he does after he brings calmness, because he changes the circumstances. He changes things, right? And then we get to say the things that we taught those kids in VBS. We get to say, "Wow, God," right? "Wow, God, I see differently now. I see what you have done through the storms that I was dealing with. You've changed it all completely, and I praise you and thank you." Some things we need to remember in the midst of those fears, that knowing God is with us and that he will never leave our side. God's very presence brings a stillness that can quiet our hearts and minds completely. Only God can do that. God's plans are always good, even with circumstances being uncertain. And the more time we spend in his presence, our fear can be replaced with faith and courage. Listen to this sentence. Peace is not the absence of the storm. It's the presence of God in the storm. How many of you know that song? Now, the first service, they know the song because it's a hymn, but "Why Worry When You Can Pray"? Do you know that song? Okay, nobody knows that song. We're not going to do it. I'm not singing alone. But listen, the words of the chorus say, "Why worry when you can pray? Trust Jesus, he'll be your stay. Don't be a doubting Thomas. Look fully on his promise. Why worry when you can pray? And that's the anchor of our life, right? Why worry when we can pray to God? The third lesson we learn is God turns shipwrecks into opportunities. Acts 27, verse 27 says these words. On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea, when about midnight the sailors sensed that they were approaching land. They took soundings and found out the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was only 90 feet deep. Fearing that we might be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved." Remember earlier when God said, listen, everyone will be safe as long as they stay with the ship, right? So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. We're going to jump down to verses 39 through 44 to see what happened. When daylight came, there we go, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a beach with a sandy beach. They saw a bay with a sandy beach, where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow stuck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. But the centurion, now listen, we say but God. See, this is God's hand in this, right? But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. See, God had other plans. God was not going to let anything happen to them, right? We know that. He made a promise to them. So when they got to land, there's a story that happened with Paul that I want to share with you. See, to show God's power. God showed his power in these verses, next verses. 28, 3 through 6 says these words. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood and he put it on the fire. A viper driven out by the heat fastened itself on his hand. How many of you know what a viper is? It's a deadly snake, right? And usually when you get bit by them, you're going to die. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer, for though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live." But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead. But after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. So question, what does it mean that God can turn our shipwrecks into opportunities? It means that what may appear to us as a disaster could be something that God's setting up for the future. Something, he's got a purpose in all of it. Letting us go through these things, he's got a purpose. Remember how Paul warned the crew not to go forward, not to leave to leave the ship and stay there for the winter, but yet they moved on? God used that shipwreck for something special. There was a guy named Publius in charge of the chief official in charge of the island. And he went and saw him. His father was dying of this terrible sickness. And God used Paul to go and bring healing to this man. Tell me our God does not have things under control and is not looking way further ahead of us and plans for us. God doesn't make mistakes, does he? But when we trust him, he takes us to where we're needed the most, where he can use us the most. And that's what he did with Paul. He directs us in the lives of people who need to know him. And he uses us in powerful ways to change the lives of people around us who need to know Jesus. Let me say this. We can't save anyone. Jesus saves, right? We can be ready, though, to speak about Jesus, and people will ask questions. And we need to be prepared to give them the answers, to tell them the truth, because the world's not going to tell them the truth. The world's going to lie to them and pull them away from the truth of who Jesus is. And I call these opportunities, I've called them divine opportunities before. I also call them divine detours, because God takes us on these things, rerouting us sometimes for his own purpose. See, that shipwreck wasn't random. It was a strategic move by God to put Paul where he could be used the most and minister effectively, to deepen his dependence on him so that Paul would trust him even more, and to reveal God's sovereignty, showing that even disasters are in his control. He's getting antsy. I better get going. Some things to remember when facing shipwreck moments. Failures and setbacks are not wasted. They are all part of God's plan. If you face something tomorrow, don't doubt it. God can do anything. He can use that storm that you're facing and do something amazing out of it and bring something amazing that we don't even see. So trust him. Let him lead you. Let him guide you, and you lean on him. And if you face a shipwreck in life, maybe it's a loss of a loved one or a broken plan or a crisis in your life, God may be using it for something special where he can use you in a different way. He may be using it to strengthen your faith in him, depending on him. He may be using it to open doors that you never knew needed opening. And you're like, finally, the fourth lesson. Here's the fourth lesson. God's mission is unstoppable. Now, before we go into reading this passage in Acts 28, I want to say this. His mission is possible. How did I say it? Is unstoppable. It's only unstoppable if we are willing to be used by him, right? We have to be ready to be used. God, use me however and wherever you want me to be, and I will do I'll be obedient. Verse 16. When we got to Rome, Paul was allowed to live by himself with a soldier to guard him. 3 days later, he called together the local Jewish leaders. When he had assembled, Paul said to them, "My brothers, although I have done nothing against our people or against the customs of our ancestors, I was arrested in Jerusalem and handed over to the Romans. They examined me and wanted to release me because I was not guilty of any crime deserving death. The Jews objected, so I was compelled to make an appeal to Caesar. I certainly did not intend to bring any charge against my own people. For this reason, I have asked to see you and talk with you. It is because of the hope of Israel that I am bound with this chain." They replied, "We have not received any letter from Judea concerning you, and none of our people who have come from there has reported or said anything bad about you. But we want to hear what your views are, for we know that people everywhere are talking about this sect." Hold for a second, right? Just people are talking, right? People are talking about our faith in Jesus today. And they want to know why we love him so much and what he has done for us. And we need to be prepared to share those answers. We need to be ready to tell them why, what Jesus, the change that he made in our lives, right? Are we prepared? Are we ready? I hope we are. Verse 23. They arranged to meet Paul on a certain day and came in even larger numbers to the place where he was staying. He witnessed to them from morning till evening, explaining about the kingdom of God, and from the law of Moses and from the prophets, he tried to persuade them about Jesus. God's purposes and plans are eternal, and they're sovereign, and they will always prevail as long as we are ready to be used by him. You know how I know that? Because I think back to the story of Joseph. Joseph could have been killed by his brothers, but God had other plans for him, right? How about Jesus? Herod tried to kill all the babies, right? And yet, Jesus lived. The gospel has continued around the world today even in persecution, because people are being persecuted today for saying the name of Jesus, and yet the gospel is still being spread. Know why? Because we're being bold and courageous. We're not compromising our faith. We're going and doing like we are told to do and commanded to do by God, and that's share Jesus with everyone we know. Wow, where does the time go when we get going? So when we face the storms of life, we need to remember storms will come, but God's plan will stand no matter what. Fear will rise, but God's presence will give us peace that will make those fears subside. Shipwrecks may happen, but God can turn them into opportunities for ministry. And opposition will come, but God's mission is unstoppable. Earlier on, I told you how Paul was getting on that boat and all those things that he was going to face. Do you know how he made it through all those things? Do you have any clue? I've told you about 50 times already. He trusted God. And that's where we are today. Are we trusting God in all things? As Alan and John, the worship team, come to close, let me say this. What about you? Are you going through some trials or storms in your life right now as you sit here? Does it seem like there's no way out or no light at the end of the tunnel? If so, you need to do what Paul did. He fully relied on God. And you say, fully relied on God? Let me show you what that looks like right here. Fully rely on God, right? Now, I'm going to say this. I've got this little friend of mine with me today. And it makes noise, so that's even better. It's a plus. So, now, as long as, I feel like I'm doing a commercial. As long as supplies last, we've got a, but I have a whole bunch of these. I'm going to ask Anna and the boys to hand out, right? And we gave them all out in the first service as well. But if you don't get one of these, we have a smaller one. And here's the deal. With these little baby ones, you bring them back, and the rest of the supply will be here this week, and we'll trade it for one of these. But why do I give you this? It's not to be a toy. It's not to play with. It's not to hear the cool squeak. I like that too. But it's an example to remember to fully rely on God in all things. In all things. Fully rely on God to help you through the storm you're facing today. He already knows what you're going through. He just wants you to cry out to him and trust him. So let me say this. If there's a storm that that's been brewing in your life, been continuing on and on and on, don't hold on to it. Here's our opportunity I told you about earlier. Come and lay it at the feet of Jesus at this altar today. Give it to him and know that he is faithful. Listen, he doesn't just walk beside us in the storm and say, wait a minute, I'm going to the end and waiting for you there. He walks every step with us along the way, through that storm, through the problems we're dealing with. And he goes beyond that. He continues to walk with us, right? Because he doesn't stop. He's always with us. Remember the words, never leave you nor forsake you. So as the music starts, if there's something that you need to surrender or give to the Lord, lay that burden down at this altar today. Come and surrender it to him today.